Greg and Katie and Isaiah, Trammell Crow and I wrote a piece in the Chronicle of Philanthropy which the other day, which identified about 7 ways in which we saw climate funders and strategists have erred in the past generations in our effort to bring folks together for climate solutions. Part of the reason that we wrote that piece was because we'd like to see changes in the way that we fund activism and changes in the way that we carry out activism. Activism has fallen into the pattern that fits with the media and profit maximization model of the political and media industries. That is to pander to the far left or pander to the far right in order to generate the news media coverage that generates the dollars that generates the activism. It actually is 2.5 times more effective to raise money when you find a demon on the other side that you can demonize than when you find an ally on the other side that you can express hope about. 2.5 times as much money and 5 times as much media when you find a demon. And so it appears when you're raising money as an environmental activist group that you're doing much better if you can demonize the other side. The problem is you're also raising money for the other side, because while you're demonizing them, they're demonizing you, and your demonization of them, activates your opposition, and your opposition ends up with more money as well. So it creates this false sense that both sides are winning while they're just building up armaments against each other. How do we move from reactivism that falls into this pattern that keeps folks divided into a new form of proactivism in which we are working in alignment with one another with all of our differences on the table, but now able to work things out? And I'm going to start with you, Isaiah, and American Conservation Coalition, and hear your thoughts. How does proactivism work for ACC? What is ACC, and what's the promise ahead?
Well, thank you for the question, Bill. I think this is one of the great questions of the time right now, especially in the moment that we're in, where conservatives have control of the federal government. One thing that we need to be thinking about is how we fund people on both sides of the aisle who can authentically speak to clean energy and conservation policies so that we can actually make sustainable progress on challenges like climate change. You know, it's been 40 years since any one party has had political control for more than 4 years. So this is an issue that we need to have buy-in on.
Is that right?
Both
more than
sides
4
of the aisle.
years.
1970.
So 40
was the last
years
time.
since any political party had control for more than 4 years.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that was at the core of the story of the founding of American Conservation Coalition. So ACC is the largest conservative grassroots environmental organization in the country. We see a strong legacy of conservative leadership on issues like conservation and clean energy innovation. You look to Theodore Roosevelt, who really started the National Park Service. There's no reason why both sides of the aisle can't be in on this issue. And if you're under 35 in this country, you care about climate change regardless of your political beliefs. This is very clear in the polling data. And so we've amassed a group of 70,000 young people across the country who are active on these issues, who care about the climate challenge, care about conservation, and are willing to encourage their leaders to do action that is in support of this. And that doesn't always look exactly like, it's not always packaged exactly as climate policy. That can look like energy dominance or energy abundance policy and supporting the kinds of permitting reform changes we need to quickly deploy clean energy, or conservation policy for natural climate solutions. And so to your point on how I see like the best way to move forward on this is that to make the most, take the biggest opportunity from this political moment, which I think is defending and continuing some of the clean energy investments that have been made, and then also going on offense and streamlining the permitting process. Climate funders need to put their money where their mouth is and fund more than they are currently right now in the conservative space. Less than 1% of climate philanthropy is going to that side of the aisle right now. And so
going to the community that represents half of the country.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's no wonder that we're not seeing sustainable progress in this issue. And so I think that continued support for that side of the aisle is absolutely necessary to see the proactivism that you're describing. And I really appreciate you and Trammell kind of highlighting that in that recent piece.
So how do you respond to folks in the donor community that might say, well, that's fine, but conservatives should be funding, we should have the hardcore conservative groups, they're the ones who should be funding ACC. We shouldn't be funding them because we're the liberal side of the aisle.
I think that, as EarthX shows, you have people on both sides of the aisle who are interested in climate and conservation. And we've amassed a group of people of very diverse supporters on this issue. I think that what I would point to is that if we care about climate particularly, we should be prepared to make the investments that are effective in order to make that happen. And so we should be willing to make the kinds of strange bedfellow kind of political alliances to make this kind of thing happen. Just last week, ACC was on an open letter to Secretary Chris Wright defending the Loan Program Office, which is a key program of the Department of Energy that funds lots of clean energy issues, from nuclear to critical minerals to transmission progress. Another organization that was on that letter was American Compass, which is the leading new right think tank in Washington, D.C., headed up by Orrin Cass, who's a close advisor to Vice President J.D. Vance. There's real opportunity in this area to make interesting political alliances around things like reindustrialization, and supporting that work is absolutely necessary in order to keep these critical programs, because if conservatives aren't hearing from their own people, then they don't have the political incentives to actually make that happen. And so there are real legitimate contributions that conservatives can make to push on this issue, things like permitting reform, and then also the investments we're going to need for reindustrialization.
Greg York, with 1.5 climate strategies, you have gathered an impressive group of donors around the climate issue. How do you use the approach of proactivism to advance your cause, and what do you think the potential of that is for cross-partisan advocacy for climate? Is it important, essential?
Yeah, I think finding bipartisan climate solutions is essential. Let's just lay that out front and foremost. You can't have durable climate action in this seesaw back and forth every 4 years, with executive orders creating things and reversing things, and legislation unwinding things and generating funds, and then all of that back and forth. That isn't the solution to long-term climate action. So we have to find the types of policies that create bipartisan compromise and solution sets. And those are the strongest policies, not just durability, but also in technical details, because there are valid points on both sides of the aisles on how to address this from different ideological backgrounds. But more on background on 1.5 climate, I lead a donor collaborative for philanthropy. So what this means is we bring together over 500 donors that care about climate across the country, and then we launch thematic presentations. So our steering committee selects a theme that we work on for a period of time. We do landscape and research analysis of the different players in the philanthropic space, who's potentially able to move the needle on X, Y, or Z issue. And then we bring those opportunities to our network through a bi-weekly virtual quick pitch stage. So adopting that VC style quick pitch, you can hear from an organization, meet their leaders, hear from them for about 10 minutes, ask your questions, and then decide from there if this is something that resonates with you and you invest in. Now, because we're a climate philanthropy focused organization, a core of our membership is progressive. Some of them very progressive, some of them moderate, and a few moderate Republicans as well. And that's something we need to work on as a community, is figure out how do we reach across not just the political aisle, but the donor aisle. There are conservatives that care about this space and want to invest in it, but don't find a safe avenue or the access to the free research that we're generating for largely the progressive left. Yeah. A bunch of free research on opportunities and how to invest. And so we highlight, especially in this era, opportunities for right-of-center climate action, and we're starting to explore that. And it's kind of testing the waters. How does our donor base react to a conservative approach to climate action? And I think it's a process, right? On the right, there's going to be some time to learn what the progressive approach is. On the left, there's going to be time to learn what the conservative approach is. But in reality, both of these approaches have solution sets, And if we bring them together and we find that compromise, we're actually not just going to have durable policies, but we're going to have better policies that are going to be more effective at addressing the problem.
So you actually, when you bring these different solution sets together, you can have more effective policy that actually works better, you think, not just more stable political policy that's a compromise.
I mean, absolutely. I used to lobby the Washington State legislature for 5 years and worked very hard on bringing conservatives along to climate action, getting them as co-sponsors for a lot of policies. And, I'm probably a fiscal conservative at heart and a progressive in my ideology around things like climate and social justice and things along those lines. And the policies that I would design in my back room, this looks great. And then when I go out and truth test it with Republicans, they're not just saying, oh, this is a bad idea because this or that. They're picking at it and saying, okay, well, what if you did this instead? And what if we relied more on market mechanisms here? Or what if we got rid of the regulation, the bureaucratic barriers here? And so then the policy is able to implement faster. It's able to be more economically efficient. And so those are the types of things that conservatives can bring to an ideology that often progressives don't. They rely more on government. They rely more on force and command and control and regulations. And so there's this kind of core ideological difference between the two parties. One's like pro-growth in government, pro-increase in tax revenue, pro-government solution. And one is kind of free market. We want to allow deregulation and rapid change. And if you bring those two together and you have the goal where you want to go and you figure out the most economically efficient way to get there and the least bureaucratic barriers to get there, that's going to be the most successful policy. And you need to bring both conservative and progressive ideologies together to achieve that kind of perfect outcome, I would say.
Give me a sense of what's it like to talk to, and I've had some of these conversations, which is why I'm asking this question, but what's it like to, when you're speaking with a donor who may be particularly progressive in his or her outlook, about the idea of bringing in conservative or Republican ideas? Is there a visceral reaction that you get to that? Is there a process, over time that people become more comfortable with that, or what's the?
Yeah, I think exposure therapy helps, and I'm very interested in the psychology of all of this. And if no one's ever read it, you should read Solution Aversion, a paper published by Duke. It's the solution sets that we propose to people often creates the resistant to believing in the problem. And so if you're a conservative and you don't believe in growth in government and regulation and increased taxation, and the solution set that a progressive proposes to you is cap and invest, a regulatory market that increases the price, increases taxation, and grows the size of government if you reinvest it all in government programs, it's a core ideological conflict. But the cognitive dissonance in our mind doesn't allow you to say, well, climate change is real, but what about a different solution set? Instead, you jump to climate denial. So all that Al Gore was doing, all that we've been doing in the progressive movement for the last 15 years has been fostering climate denial on the right. Yeah. Well, I think there's the exact same thing on the left, which is solution denial.
Yes, yeah.
Where they don't actually believe that a market mechanism can work. The most economically efficient solution set that we have. Every economist across the country will agree that a market mechanism is the most economically efficient way to address this problem. But because of the core ideology that we need government programs, we need this, we need that, a revenue neutral carbon price that doesn't grow the size of government, doesn't grow the taxation base and the programs investing in clean energy transition, there is denial that it would work.
I sense that you have to, that's weak, that you need a mandate, that a mandate's going to work, and anything short of a mandate is going to be ineffective. But mandates actually, don't work as well as market mechanisms do, because if you're mandating something that is just impossible to achieve or difficult or expensive, there's always an end run that happens.
And I found it easier to work through solution aversion through conservatives. You just suggest solutions that don't conflict with their core ideology, or even better, reinforce their core ideology. And they can normally get there, and all of a sudden, oh, well, I guess if that's a solution set, maybe climate change is something we could do something about, therefore I'll work with you on that. Solution denial seems harder to overcome. How do you convince progressives that these market-based mechanisms, reliance on non-government programs will work? I haven't yet figured out the knob there.
to have that happen. Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a fundraiser for a major Republican donor organization, and he expressed to me, and I could just feel the emotion in this. This is why it really affected me forever, I guess. He was speaking about the arrogance that he feels when he speaks to a progressive about any issue at all, basically. And it was just this, and I could feel it because I've sensed it myself too, a kind of an arrogant belief that we, and all ideologues tend to be, that we know what's best and you guys just need to learn it. And I was reminded of that the other day when somebody mentioned where they're doing I don't know, an article, a film or something on why being right isn't enough. And I thought, well, that's kind of magnanimous. On the other hand, it's kind of arrogant. Why being right isn't enough. And the point is, well, we're right on climate, but that's not enough. Now we need to do more. In my experience, the right has the best solutions, but are in denial of the problems. The left have the best understanding of the problems, but they're in denial about the solutions. You bring them together and you can have both of those worlds, but both have to acknowledge that they're wrong about something. And it's hard to get either side to acknowledge that they're wrong. How do we get there?
Yeah, well, I think one of the tough things for someone like me is the left is ready to move, and like you say, maybe their solution set's not as economically efficient. Mm-hmm. However, it does work. Cap and invest is a functional policy. It'll achieve the outcome. And generally rise up the economy. Like the marketplaces that have this are some of the leading economies in the U.S. and Washington State and California. It is not stifling growth because the clean future is the economic future. Mm-hmm. The places that get ahead because they have a market signal to get ahead are the ones that are going to be ahead. And so we absolutely need to move. And it's difficult that on the right side of the aisle there is a resistance to movement. And really blocking movement to a large degree. And so this has left me, despite being a fiscal conservative, voting for Democrats my whole life because I want the action. This is my primary issue. This is what I care the most about. Mm-hmm. And so I think there needs to be this moment in time where, what ACC is fostering, there's a youth movement within the Conservative Party saying, we demand this to happen. Yeah. And if you want to get reelected, you need to start moving on this. Mm-hmm. We understand it's not like the bedrock of your top priority, but we want to see forward movement, not blockading. And I think it's coming. The polling is clear. Young people in America, both sides of the aisle, want action on this issue. Yeah. As they start capturing political power, it'll be unavoidable that we have to move on this. And there's that 100th monkey and all these other things. We are going to solve this problem as humanity. It's just how long is it going to take us to come together to solve the problem? Yeah. And how much strife we have is going to be a function of that timeline. Mm-hmm.
Katie, you've worked in the field, you work in the energy field right now, you're kind of an activist from within, as there are so many thousands of people, I note, from within the oil and gas sector and within every industry. There are people who feel passionately that we need to move past the problems and past the production of carbon and get to the job of producing energy for our needs in all of these different areas. How do we get past that adversarialism and that animosity that divides people and get people to actually work together?
So I love saying these words to people. Why are we fighting each other and not GHG emissions? Mm-hmm. If we could just put the energy that we have, the human, the emotion into fighting climate change and not each other, mm-hmm. And innovating and looking at what's possible and solutions, we would get there. So look, I think it's more things like what we just saw on this stage. Leadership. Look, we need people that are in what I call the rational, pragmatic middle, all of you, to be out there having conversations. You don't need to be a congressman or woman to be building coalitions and having these conversations. It's interesting when you were bringing up psychology. I used to be a safety manager in the oil and gas industry. And one of the things we would talk about in safety was we prioritize safety. And we actually started saying, no, we value safety. Values don't change, priorities do. And I think this country does value a healthy planet. I think we are all grounded on the right values, but your values shape your beliefs, and your beliefs are shaped by your lived experiences, right? Like, if you don't experience something different, you don't know, right, how to think about that differently or how to have that conversation. And so what I like to say is conversations are so critical. I remember a day, anybody in here, my Gen Xers, when we didn't have the phones, right? I come from that age of no phones. You talk to your neighbor. It didn't matter how they voted. We had conversations. He's shaking his head because you know what I'm talking about. Conversations. Like, people hide behind computers. That's the new way to bully people is social media. So I think about it, and it's so simple. It really is so simple. It goes back to having discussions, looking around you and saying, who in this room is a part of this rational middle? And I will tell you, the polls show it's like 65% of the country, 70% of the country is in this wide, vast middle where we want solutions. It's the polls that get the noise. And so what I keep telling people is, no, the middle needs to rise up. The middle needs to be on stages talking about these things like at EarthX. This is why I love this. You talked earlier about the 10 types of people that are here. I represent the energy workforce of the future. I represent every kind of person there is, because everybody needs a job, right? Everybody needs income. These are great paying jobs. So I see people from the left, the right, in the middle, old, young, right, black, brown, white, the whole spectrum. And I feel like we just got to ground ourselves on, hey, I think we're valuing the same thing. It's the approach. And we have to appreciate the approach, because this country is about diversity of thought, and civility. So I think, for me, it's we've got to get back to having real conversations, being able to hear each other, listen, but then make that spread like we're able to spread like wildfire on the left and the right. I feel like we've got to get the conversations. The guys that sat on this table or sat on this stage just beforehand, I literally texted every person I knew, check this out. 2 congressmen from 2 sides of the aisle talking about climate and energy and saying we can do this together. So we just need more of that.
Yeah. So we know we need to have those conversations across partisan boundaries, and I would encourage people, if you have questions and comments that you'd like to make, please begin to do those now. How do we pragmatically organize a group? ACC you've recruited 70,000 kids across the country, young people across the country at colleges. That's pretty damned impressive. How did you do that without necessarily inflaming them with fear and hatred? Or maybe you did. Maybe that worked.
It wasn't that approach. We value solutions that work, and we're willing to criticize and to criticize approaches that don't work and elevate ones that do. And so when you look at young people across the country, they see the face of climate activism as people who are throwing tomato soup on paintings, who are gluing themselves to roads, and it's organized from a movement that is denigrating major sources of clean energy like nuclear. The largest environmental group in this country currently opposes nuclear energy, all nuclear energy. It's half of our clean capacity in the United States.
Is that Sierra Club?
It's Sierra Club.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify.
And so young people are looking for solutions. They want things that work, and they don't want just pointless activism that is not making anyone happy or is deeply negative. And that's what the climate movement has been about for a very long time. And so what is ACC offering? Well, we're offering a solution that's pro-America, that allows you to get into your communities to do a cleanup on Earth Day instead of throw tomato soup at a painting. And that empowers you to, as a conservative, approach these issues in a way that benefits other priorities that you have. Things like bringing jobs back to the United States, bringing manufacturing to the United States, building energy dominance. And so that's the way that we've been able to build this mass movement. And I think it's the solution going forward. Is that like Greg just said, conservatives have a solution to this issue that are unique to this set and are needed in the conversation. We just need to understand the same problem. And once we do that, then we can come to solutions together. And we can also support the leaders who are currently leading on this issue, like Congressman Fleischman and other people who are standing up for this. They need support from their conservative constituents when they stand up for clean energy action.
Now, one of the books, and by the way, anybody who has a question, please raise your hand, and I will call on you. I'm going to ask one question myself, and then I'm going to go to that. So a generation or two ago, Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. It was a powerful and very instructive manual for how to rabble-rouse, basically, and attract a lot of opposition to a whole set of companies. It was very anti-corporate, very anti-capitalist in its view, but it laid out a game plan. I would like to see us come forward with a game plan for proactivism. Now, principles and practices of proactivism that can emerge from Earth X here, and one of the things that we'll try to do from this group is to discern some of those. I'm going to offer a couple of those in a minute, but I'd like you to think about what are the principles and practices of proactivism. And yes, question.
Yeah, so my name is Andy Weinstein. I just was actually lobbying Congress a few weeks ago on tariffs on behalf of the American Beverage Association. And one of the things that we kept on coming up in every single conversation is when we talked to Republican members of Congress as we were working out of the Capitol Hill Club, every single one of them said, we do not believe in the tariffs, we think this is a stupid plan, but we will not go against Trump. So how do we kind of work together where we essentially have these members of Congress who are doing all the actions contrary to what they say they believe in? Because there's nothing free trade about tariffs, right? There's nothing conservative about creating an isolationistic economy. So how do we kind of bridge that gap where it's not just having real conversations with like you guys where it's a kind of conservatives, but the people who are actually empowered to make decisions when they have the opportunity are not. And that's kind of the biggest problem that I see is we have a lot of people who have, I guess, political cowardice when it comes to especially anything in the sustainability space.
So I want to jump in real quick on this. It gets back to psychology. This is fear. People are afraid. We're in a country where we're supposed to be free. Ask people, do you feel free to speak openly about how you feel? It's fear. And so the way we get at this is we bring all the people who want to see the change together and determine the plan of how we're going to take fear down. That's what this is. I know it sounds incredibly simple, and I'm not speaking from a policy perspective. I'm speaking directly to humans, okay? When the pain is so great that it impacts somebody's pocketbook, it impacts their livelihood, right? It impacts their day-to-day. That's when people go, wait a minute, I can't support this anymore, right? I'm breaking my back for this, and I'm not winning, right? So when people start to feel like they're not winning enough, that's when there's the straw's going to break the back. The thing is we got to go find all those people. And there are a lot of those people are here. That's why this is my second EarthX. And last year, I literally walked out of here with 6 business cards of people that I could follow up with, right? To go have conversations to say, okay, how are we going to influence this? Because yes, the political system is broken when it comes to election, right? We all know that. That isn't going to get solved overnight. But bite by bite, we bite that elephant. But to me, this is totally about leading from a place of fear and not from a place, right, of good. And we've got to find all that goodness. And that's how you build a coalition, how you build, right, consensus, how you build, and then you start seeing people become the outliers and they start stepping up and saying, yeah, I'm willing to put my neck out on the line. Those two gentlemen did, right? Those are two people that have come together and they've found a solution. So I think it's in all of us to walk away and say, how do I go find a way, right, to equip myself to do that? And it's hard. It's not going to be easy, right? If it were easy, then everybody would be doing it. But remember, it's not going to change until people start really seeing, right, a personal impact to themselves. And that's when they're going to be looking for leaders like you and all of you to say, I want to come along. I want to come along.
I would say, coming from the American Beverage Association, we're like 80% Republican in our donations, right? And from the tariffs perspective, it affects. Sorry. So the American Beverage Association tends to be about 80% Republican in their support. And the tariffs are directly affecting us because about 25% of our cost is cans, right? So when you look at how these are affecting our businesses, it is direct. We are talking, we literally have all of the independent and corporate bottlers in DC. We went and talked to every member of Congress that we could, and every single Republican said the exact same thing. And so it is led by fear, absolutely, but how do we break that? Because right now, they are kind of almost like derelict in their duties if they're not listening to their constituents that have financially supported them for many years. And now it ended up being the joke at the end that the Democrats were the party of big business because they actually understand how things operate. And I think Bill put it well, is like we identify the problems well on the left side, but we don't necessarily have the best responses, the best actions. But at this point, it's really hard to kind of get beyond that fear if they're not going to move, and we can scream in their faces, we can pull funding from their campaigns.
Right.
We just don't know what those levers are anymore.
Let's have you ask your question as well, and we can answer them both.
Okay, my name's John Dorff. I'm with a company called ISB, Infused Seed Ball. And so just getting practical on the using kind of conservative values, using market-based systems to push climate solutions. We plant trees, and then we take those trees and generate carbon credits, and voluntary carbon credits. And so I was just curious if you guys have any awareness of this, and then understanding that, like, the people who are the buyers of these credits are the Microsofts, the Googles, the big corporations who have these ESG commitments to be carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050. And for this whole system to work, we have to be able to have those guys buy the credits, because we can't plant the trees without somebody to buy the credits. So can you just talk about sort of the corporate side of this, the corporate responsibility side that should be somewhat conservative?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in, and thank you for your work. It's very important that we're fostering these voluntary markets, and I'm very thankful for the major corporations that are buying those credits and creating that marketplace, as well as the consumers that are buying them when they fly or purchase other things. And I'm really a supporter of like integrating in that little widget, like, can I offset my carbon? Yes. And a lot of people are choosing to do that. I personally don't believe that the long-term solution is voluntary activism in this space. I think there's so many people that we can't expect to get educated fully on the issue, that they need to have that pocketbook signal. But the work in these voluntary markets is helping flush out the measurement and verification, the identification, so that it becomes market ready for a true, like, economy-wide carbon market. And I think that carbon market should not just be a tax on carbon emissions, the pollution that we're emitting. It should also be a direct credit for people who are sequestering and storing carbon on the planet. And so whether that's an existing forest, a new forest that you've planted, there's carbon that's being stored there. The same thing exists on the sequestration space. We are externalizing the benefits that these ecosystems are creating, and the people who are creating the ecosystems are not getting the financial reward that is due. And so a true carbon marketplace should not only internalize those external costs of pollution, but also internalize those external benefits of sequestration. And whether that's agricultural sequestration, aquaculture sequestration, rotational grazing to get more carbon in the soil, or planting and growing more trees. All of those are very beneficial and reverse the negative effects of emitting CO2 in the atmosphere and the radiative forcing that creates. And so we need to build marketplaces that recognize that, and the voluntary market is a great place to start. But I think we do need to then translate that into policy after we flesh out the measurement and verification. And as you know, there's a lot of measurement and verification arguments and debates going on right now in the sequestration space about how much carbon is there, what is the value of that, and all of that. But this is the process. Like, we are all, I'm an optimist. Like, I think 99.9% of people, whether they're legislators or individuals or conservatives or progressives, want a healthy, happy future for them, their children, and the planet. Like, we're not out here to destroy the world. There's very few people in that category. Where we get hung up is in our ideology, in the fear of partisanship or our caucus and how we have to behave. And that calls for a moment of leadership. We need people stepping up and saying, I'm going to do what's right rather than what I'm being told to do. And that's good leadership.
And then they need to actually win elections
Yeah,
as
and
a
then
consequence.
I think there will be, you know, people pulling money from PACs, young people turning out and voting.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of really unpopular things happening right now, and there's going to be political consequences for that in a couple of years, I suspect. And, you know, we have to make sure that good people are running for office for the right reasons, and they're willing to be leaders. And that's in both sides of the aisle. So I would expect some people that are taking really poor votes may get primaried by other Republican challengers and say, why aren't you leading on this? Why are you following? Because they want, you know, that's what constituents want, is leaders, not followers that are representing their district.
We're approaching the end of this session, and I want to lay out just a couple of principles and practices in the area of proactivism, and then I think we're going to take a little break and then convene as tables and kind of have a very informal / formal session of opportunities for you to chat with people with particular ideas and focuses before we go to lunch. Now, later on this afternoon, we start a new conference called the Circular Economy Conference, where we're going to talk about a lot of these nature-based solutions and how we can create an economic structure in which nature-based solutions flourish and are rewarded for all of the many benefits that they provide us. And one of the objectives that we have adopted here at EarthX is to begin to organize and recruit people in support of this vision of a more circular economy. Now, how do we do that? Well, there are a few things that we have found are useful and necessary. Number one is invest in hope, not in fear. Now, that requires a different approach to fundraising, because we know that the human species is programmed to respond to fear before hope, for the obvious reason that if there is a threat to our life out there, we need to deal with that threat first before we can follow our drive to hope. It's not that we prefer fear to hope. It's that we know that our survival depends on us reducing the fears. And so the formula for fundraising is generally fear first. You put fear out there first because people will respond to fear. They are under threat. Something's going to happen that will end their life or end the life of someone else, and they need to act on that. And that's why when you do a hope-based solicitation for funding, you raise about 40% as much as when you do a fear-based solicitation for funding, and that's just very difficult. But you need to invest in hope anyway. You need to recognize it's going to cost you more to recruit each dollar for hope, but you need to do that because hope sustains us over the long term. So we need to invest in hope. We need to minimize our opposition. One of the problems with generating money through fear is that we tend to overshoot and we generate fear about a whole array of opponents. You know, the entire capitalist system is against us, or the entire corporate system is against us, or every beverage company or every one of these industries is against us. Narrowing that demon that is the opponent to the absolute minimum possible, and hopefully somebody's not that powerful. You know, if you need to have a demon, it needs is to be a small, powerful demon that you can defeat, and everybody else has to be potential heroes. So that's, number two. Number three, the best demon is, of course, the problem, not an institution. It helps to give the demon a personal, personalization and kind of humanize the demon. It's a strange tendency, but the demon, if at all possible, is GHG, as you say, greenhouse gases. It's not the institution. It's not the people. So minimize the demon so that you're not buying off more opposition, because that just raises money for the other side and perpetuates the war. And then focus on the deciders. Now, who are the deciders? We say we want to organize this middle 70%. That sounds like a big job, organizing the middle 70% of the public. Do we need to organize them so that they're bigger? No, we don't. All we need are the deciders, and the deciders are the 2 or 3% of voters, in the case of voters, and in the marketplace, 2 to 3% of the most influential consumers who decide the outcomes of primaries, basically. And so focusing in on recruiting people inside districts where there are potentially competitive primaries, where you make it an imperative for the party that's going to win that primary, especially in a partisan district, that person is responsible to solutions, then you have a very manageable number of people that you need to have on your side. And then finally, advertising on what I'll call third force media. That right now we advertise on media that tend to perpetuate and profit from the division of people into these categories, and we enable our consumer brands to advertise on that media, favoring and encouraging our advertisers to advertise on media that appeal to that middle rather than that are appealing to the extremes is difficult. I've had communicators, who tell me, for example, there was a program several years ago with Van Jones on the left and Newt Gingrich on the right that acquired a very good, robust audience on one of the conservative networks, bigger audience than just focusing on the conservatives. And they were shut down, not because they didn't have a great audience, but because the audience didn't meet the criteria that the advertisers had set out demographically. They wanted to advertise to a particular demographic set. So even though it was more people, it was more difficult demographically for them, and they didn't want to advertise on the program. Well, that's not helpful to the American democracy, encouraging advertisers to put their dollars behind the programs that bring people together. That also can help. So these are certain principles and practices for proactivism that we want to pull together, and we want to work with everybody in this room to develop other principles and practices for a robust proactivist movement that advances real climate solutions that work. Any closing thoughts that you have before we retire to some conversation tables here?
Just one addition, I think. One other principle I'd say is to be willing to work with people who share some of your goals, but might not share all of your goals. It's not just about, I don't think, assembling kind of people who are in the middle, but it's also about identifying the common goals that you can make across different political institutions. The example that I gave earlier about American Compass, again, this like new right think tank that is leading on this stuff, signing on to this letter to the Loan Program Office saying we need to keep this critical piece of infrastructure, not necessarily because of clean energy goals, but because of reindustrialization. That is the kind of thing that works and that is able to do ambitious new policy and also defend and maintain policy that's already been made. And so being willing to keep the goal in mind, the outcome in mind, without applying all of the purity tests that we might be tempted to apply, is absolutely critical. And that's another reason why supporting the eco-right work, I think, is really critical, is to be able to find those coalitions of groups in order to make real progress in this issue.
Maybe not a closing, but something that's been on my mind through the conversation around fostering that rational middle and media and the role that it's playing, and a risk factor is social media. This is a great technology, but it is very dangerous. And what happens is that it is shrinking the middle and it's growing the polarization, because you can always find someone that's more right-leaning than you or more left-leaning than you. And then you see their comment, and more radical comment, and more radical comment, and more radical comment. And you keep getting dragged to the extremes because you live in this social media bubble, rather than having those real conversations with neighbors and being like, oh, I understand their opinion. Oh, that's different. And so we all sit at home and we watch our MSNBC or our Fox News, and we get further reinforced of this extreme ideology that isn't real. And so we need to find a way to counteract that. And, if the organic spread towards, that more ideological extreme wasn't bad enough, there is actual structured algorithms, clickbait. They are literally trying as hard as they can to create more extremism in this country through clickbait ads. And so there is a whole industry out there that is fostering radicalism between the left and the right, and we need to figure out how to counteract that.
Is it an industry that's primarily looking to sell advertisements ultimately,
They're
or is
just
there a
doing it for the
political
money.
industry
They
that
make
wants
more
to,
money
Yeah.
on that radical clickbait
Yeah.
than they do on a moderate message.
So it's not necessarily their political objectives. The political objectives are a way to get to their ad sales objectives.
Exactly.
So
It's
if we change the behavior
it's
of the
greed for
advertisers,
money, that has created this system that is radicalizing the country rather than fostering a rational middle.
Well, we know who controls who, advertises where, and that's moms. And so, we're going to need moms out there to ask that the brands that they support the advertising practices that actually support the lives of their children and the future of their children.
So I'm a mom, and I carried my daughter Allie on my back in almost chest-high water in Hurricane Harvey. And I will tell you this, and I'm looking at the gentleman who asked the question earlier about, how do we get there? People are getting tired. They are so tired, right? Just go ask anybody. Are you tired? Everything's getting easier. Ask questions. How are you feeling? Do you remember when? Because I think at the end of the day, people will turn. I turned on Trump. I'm proud to say that. I turned on my party. And do I fear things? Sure. Have I had some interesting things from neighbors? I mean, neighbors, right? But I'll give you an example. We'll end on this. My neighbor came over to my house to fix something. It's like borrowing sugar or whatever, right? And he came over and he fixed a lamp. And he follows me on social media. And we do not agree on everything, okay? And he's just coming at me. And I said, aren't you tired of fighting? Can we just go meet down the street and have a conversation? Guess what? We have the same views right now on our medical system that's, falling apart, right? So there's so much common ground, like he was saying. We just gotta find the common denominator, connect emotionally with each other, not on fear, but on hope. And just remember, people are getting tired. People are turning every day because they want to see change and they want to see solutions for the future. So have hope, as you said, Bill. And I'm a mom. I'm hopeful. My daughter needs all of us, and your children need you too. So you're all stewards of this great work.
Thank you. Thank you, the panel, for your work every day. I know that it's hard. Each of you has chosen a very difficult battle and a very difficult path, and I know that every day it's a challenge. We all face these challenges, and I had a friend call with a real challenge the other day, and it's my gosh, everybody is in the midst of this. Everybody faces these difficulties. So thank you to everybody for the work that you are all doing, and the triumph that's ahead for us as we work to actually solve these problems. We're going to have conversations at the tables now. Thank you, and I'll explain who the tables that we have coming.